Hey folks, this is Spencer. Just wanted to let you know we had a little technical issue recording this latest episode, and so you'll notice as you're listening that the audio is not as clean as it usually is. We do apologize for that and for the inconvenience. We hope you'll enjoy the episode anyway, and we will be back to normal with our regular audio quality next week. Hello, and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. I'm your host, Spencer Clavin, features editor of the American Mind and associate editor of the Claremont Review of Books. I am joined by Cam Classic, you might call us, the dream team of James Poulos, editor of the American Mind, Seth Barron, managing editor, and Ryan Williams, publisher and president. Guys, I wonder what we're going to talk about today. I don't know. There's not much going on in the news. No. Yeah, it's been a minor political situation. We're recording this the day after midterm election day. Of course, some key races still uncalled for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the nation's wealthiest country cannot bring in its election results in a timely manner. But the general kind of mood out there in the red Twitterverse and abroad is somewhat subdued, I would say, this morning. It ranges from subdued to downright, to downright miserable, to furious, to calling for, total blood and fury when it comes to the Republican leadership and so on and so forth. We're going to get into all of that. But let's just give a quick rundown of kind of what the big takeaways were so far. A lot of the kind of real hopeful reaches that Republicans were starting to get excited about in the lead up that we talked about last week, things like, the governor's election in New York did not turn out Republicans' way. Kathy Hochul did manage to win election over Lee Zeldin. The major Republican win, of course, was in Florida. Ron DeSantis, having squeaked by, really, in his initial election with just a 30,000 vote margin, has now handily defeated Charlie Crist with a huge margin. He's won big, either majority or in some cases plurality among various Hispanic groups, not just Cubans, which are kind of traditionally break right, but also Puerto Ricans and a number of others. So that's the kind of big encouraging note among Republicans. Otherwise, as of right now, I'm looking at the results on the New York Times. We've got 172 House seats called for Democrats, 197 for Republicans, 218 still up for grabs. In the Senate, 48 seats for Democrats, 47 for Republicans, 50 not 50, excuse me. There's therefore still, 5 left to be controlled. Uncalled key races in Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada. So that's Herschel Walker versus Warnock in Georgia, Blake Masters versus Kelly in Arizona, and Adam Laxalt versus Masto in Nevada. Others that we can raise and discuss as we go, but some of the kind of demographic and or strategic questions on the table include, are the youth just lost? Republicans tended to kind of clean up among the over 45 crowd. They tended to do badly among the under 45 crowd. That was upsetting, and obviously, if present trends continue, not a good look. Then we've got the whole kind of Trump-DeSantis question, right? A lot of these really Trump-endorsed candidates still, not performing super well. Trump himself having come out swinging against DeSantis, calling him, I think, Ron DeSanctimonious recently, and repeated talk that he might declare his intention to run in 2024, although not yet confirmed. But also, as I mentioned already, a big night for DeSantis himself. Guys, the typical kind of response to these big political events is just to have all your priors confirmed. I've been hearing a lot of that lately and trying to sort it out and make sense of it myself. But let's maybe just start here, and I'll open up the floor. What takeaways can we actually draw from this at this stage, if any? Not necessarily to do with Republican strategy going forward. We can wait to talk about Trump, DeSantis, and all that, but about the state of the American electorate and their response in this policy environment, which by all accounts should have been extremely favorable to Republicans. Wild inflation, terrible economic consequences of rampant Democratic spending, serious culture war issues on the table to do with education and recrimination from COVID lockdowns. All the stuff we've been talking about should have been really good for Republicans, was not so good. What can we take away from this?
Well, if you don't mind if I just jump in here. In 2018 and 2020, Democrats were very enthusiastic there's going to be a blue tsunami that would just sweep Republicans out and establish total control. And that didn't happen. I mean, in 2020, Biden won supposedly 81 million votes, and they lost seats in the House. There's a tendency for everybody to get a little carried away. And I think we have to put this into perspective. 6 months ago, when the Dobbs decision came out, there was a lot of sense oops, well, I guess we wanted this. Let's, what is the fallout going to be? And then with the economy getting so bad, I feel that kind of got sidelined. But, to be honest, I mean, they've been pushing this. And, the youth votes clearly went hard left. It's hard to discount the idea that Dobbs had no impact on this. I think maybe there's a certain amount baked in. And, whatever the blue wave and the red wave kind of canceled each other out. Still, I feel 4 or 6 weeks ago, before all the red tsunami talk got going, if people told us, hey, you're going to dethrone Nancy Pelosi, Stacey Abrams and Beto O'Rourke will be just consigned to loserdom forever, and we'll sort of hold the Senate, whatever. It's not going to be that different. I mean, that's I'll take it. Even 6 months ago, I was saying to people, well, I'm not going to say I was a major, Nostradamus on this, but nobody I talked to really thought that Kathy Hochul was going to lose. It seemed 4 or 5 points, and that's where it wound up. I feel New Hampshire, Oregon, this was kind of getting a little into fantasy land. I mean, look, it's easy to get carried away, but you've just got to recognize that it's a fight. We're not going to the country is clearly sort of locked in this almost 50-50 gridlock. And, I don't know what's going to change that. So that's my take.
Yeah. No, that's not bad, Seth. Two things at least. I was going to also lead with we're a 50-50 country in many ways. So as you distribute that across congressional districts and Senate seats and all the rest, it's a little messy, but I think that remains fundamentally the case. And it's the white pill for the right, broadly speaking, is that's pretty remarkable given the institutional dominance and capture that the Democrats have had of nearly all the heights of American leading institutions, whether they be cultural, communications and media, or political. So we're staying competitive politically in a certain sense. It remains true that no Republican has won the popular vote in quite a few years. But then the downside is you look at some of the exit polls, you always with a couple asterisks and a grain of salt all thrown in there, if I can mix those metaphors. But it does look like that Dobbs was not a wash. It helped Democrats, partly because it was painted as something that it was not, that somehow, and I think successfully painted as something that it was not, that the court was taking away a right for the first time, and this, abortion was going to be illegal across the 50 states, which is, of course, far from what Dobbs did. But anyway, that was successful messaging from the Democrats, as well as on exit polling, this kind of democracy's at stake nonsense. The cut rate Mussolini act from Biden at the Red sermon and then the follow-up talk. I think that kind of worked with a lot of people if you look at exit polls. So that's not great news. It's pretty disheartening because it's absurd to think that democracy was at stake in this election. The fevered rants of folks like who's that historian that just said that like historians won't be allowed to write last week? Michael Beschloss, yeah, on MSNBC or CNN or wherever he was. So it's a mixed bag. I think also, and I'll take up the Trump question, Spencer. I think a lot any unipolar explanations for any of this are overdetermined, to use that overused word these days. And I think that's the case with Trump. It's hard to really know what effect Trump. I mean, it's a mixed bag for Trump. A bunch of Trump-backed candidates at the House level, quote unquote, election deniers, were either reelected or elected. 200 of them is the number being bandied about on the internet. Of course, not all of them Trump endorsed, but there are plenty of controversial candidates who got elected, and less than impressive candidates who went down in states that we probably should have won, like Pennsylvania. So it's a pretty mixed bag overall. I think the Yuval Levin, his conclusion was that Trump is the single cause and the hugest problem. I don't quite agree with that, but that Yuval did write, I think, correctly in National Review this morning that we've kind of had since the 90s 2 minority parties that trade off power. Neither of these two parties, which is anomalous in American political history for the most part, actually pretty much full stop, 2 minority parties sort of locked in gridlock, trading the presidency and Congress back and forth. So it remains the case that neither of these parties has been able to convince the electorate to hand them convincing control of national politics for any extended period of time. How one breaks through that, either one of the two parties or one of them transforms into something else. I think the prospects for the Republican Party transforming into something that might be able to do that are more likely than the Democratic Party is currently constituted. And it's part of what I think some of us have been fighting for, writing about, trying to think through. So I'm not despairing. I'm not that excited. It's a slog, as has been the case in recent years.
Yeah, just a few reflections, few ruminations here. I feel like Matt Peterson today. Just some thoughts about that grind, that slog, that 50-50 split. I mean, it really is. I remember election 2000 where it was like, wow, like country's really divided. And like, gosh, this has never happened before. And here we are to this very day, waiting for runoff elections, waiting for 12,000 votes here or there. Why? I want to ask, why is this happening? And I think it's simply happening because one of the factions in this country wants to have an ultimate duel, a final total conflict over who will control the country, to the point of defining, what the country is, what it means, what citizenship means, what the character of the people is, what the culture of the people is, what, in effect, the religion of the people is, for control over the world. This is not a drill when people get up and say, like, we must protect our sacred global democracy. That means globalization. That means globalism. That means one governing apparatus in the world and over the world. And as we see, it means one set of hands on the control panel of the computation of the world, of the technological apparatus that is used to shape and reshape people and countries and civilizations in this way. You can't really get to that point unless you have an ultimate duel, and you can't get to that point unless you have an ultimate villain. And when that faction controls and shapes the way that politics is conducted, and the way that conflicts are waged, and the way that propaganda is formed and disseminated, and the way that it's all communicated through media organs and allegedly non-governmental organizations, then that's what you get. And a lot of folks on the other side, on the right, are very uncomfortable with this, but they don't really know how to respond. There are disagreements about how to respond. Some people just want to be left alone so they can live lives of virtuous flourishing. Others want to be left alone so they can, live in the pod and eat the bugs. And if there's one thing that does unite the right now, it is a desire not to rule all of America and all Americans. It is a desire not to have an ultimate battle for control of the world. The emotional center of gravity on the right now is not in favor of waging some kind of crusade or jihad in order to make sure that every quote unquote woke-tard in America is deprogrammed and re-educated and turned into a chest-thumping, red-blooded American citizen. I think there is a remarkable degree of disinterest on the right in carrying out that sort of program. And I think there is a remarkable amount of agreement on the right that we do not have vicious and implacable foreign enemies as we did in much of the recent past in American history. But it's true that on the right there are still, there's still a faction where no, in fact, there is a feeling that America has these implacable world enemies, as it always, quote unquote, always has. And so the right's going to remain fragmented in this way, and the left is going to continue to consolidate under this vision of, one Borg to rule them all. And that faction is going to continue to spray the charisma of democracy on this, dehumanizing apparatus. You look at, this is my other thought here is, why does a guy like Michael Beschloss get on TV and start freaking out about democracy? I couldn't help but notice, that his wife, I think, is the more interesting figure, and they explain exactly what's going on in his unhinged rant. She is, I'm just going to do a little reading from Wikipedia here. I think everyone will enjoy. Born in Iran in 1956, daughter of a prominent education reformer, initially barred from leaving the country in 1979. But the family eventually made it to the U.S. in the 1980s, settling in the Washington, D.C. swamp area. Sounds like a heroic and delightful American tale in the making, but let's run through the CV. Taught international trade at Oxford, started to work at J.P. Morgan in corporate finance, moved to the World Bank, became treasurer, chief investment officer, 1994 class of the World Economic Forum's Global Leaders for Tomorrow program. Worked at Shell International Group, planning in London, became managing director and partner of the Carlyle Group, founded an investment firm, Rock Creek Group, $14 billion in investments, and the list goes from there. This is kind of one of these people who, member of the Board of Trustees, American Red Cross, member of the Board of Trustees, World Resources Institute, member of the Board of Trustees, Institute for Advanced Study, hosts at UC Berkeley, Bretton Woods Committee, Council on Foreign Relations, Board of Directors, Georgetown, Williams College, Ford Foundation, the Vaccine Alliance, Rockefeller Brothers Fund, Urban Institute, World Wide Web Foundation. The list goes on and on and on. And so, this is the character type, this is the class type of a person who is the Borg. Is where a person like that ends and where this lattice work of institutions which no citizen can affect the composition of begins and the other ends. It's very difficult to see that, and it is exactly that sort of person, and it is that class of elites that is the most bent on spraying the kind of the feeling of democracy, the idea of democracy, onto a machinery which is, it's like the meme of John Travolta like walking in and looking around, and he's in just blank, empty space. He's in the void, sort of like, where's the democracy? Oh, well, it's an idea that we infuse into the system that has really no, maybe it's a plebiscite at best, but it doesn't get much more than that. And so, confronting that this is kind of like the table has been set, this is the world that we're in, and this is what we have to work with, shouldn't be that shocking to anyone, I don't think. Politics just isn't going to be as entertaining as it used to be, and that's probably a healthy thing in spite of the sickness everywhere else around us.
In response to some parts of that, James, which I found very interesting, I was thinking a little bit about DeSantis's acceptance speech, which has been circulating a lot. And, I quite liked what Ben Shapiro said about some of this, which is that, like, the political leadership keeps drawing the wrong messages from the kinds of messages, keeps drawing the wrong conclusions from the messages that the people are sending them in the vote. And I thought about this when I was reading people's responses to the DeSantis acceptance speech, in which he said, to riotous applause, this is where woke goes to die. He had this big, very DeSantis-esque celebration of all that they've accomplished and a truly impressive, list of successes. And front and center was this, the concept that nobody has been able to come up with a better name for than woke, which is like, they're transing your kids, they are, they want you in the Borg, and basically the things that James is describing, that final confrontation, like, if only we could just, stage a grand Götterdämmerung, then at last, like, the Koyev's one world government would come marvelously into fruition, and, like, the human individual could sort of cede gratefully into the background, at last relieved of his burden of existing. And this speech, this DeSantis speech, which kind of like declares what I think of as like a very American response to all of that hyper complex and very anemic sort of like actually guy explanation vibe. He has this, the great appeal of DeSantis, he has this sort of robust, red-blooded American response, which is like up yours, basically. Like, we'll fight woke on the beaches, we'll fight it in the schools, and this is where Florida is where woke goes to die. This speech was like a Rorschach test. Like, everybody that I was listening to was drawing something different out of it. And there was like, well, this shows that culture war is really where it's at in terms of Republican politics. This shows that, like, Trump is over in terms of Republican politics. This shows that, like, effective governance is what people really want. And I think, each of those approaches has some merit to it. To me, it strikes me that, like, what it really shows is that people don't necessarily want moderate politicians, but they do want, like, realist politicians, like people who are talking in blunt and direct terms about the actual problems on the ground, which are cultural and spiritual and have to do with the discomfort that a lot of us feel about going gently into that good globalist night. We just don't want to do that. And this, when I was watching, like, on CNN, all the kind of analysts doing their typical routine of shock. I mean, I don't think it's a routine. I think it's genuine shock that, like, well, people actually aren't that worried about, like, the end of democracy or, like, January 6th or election denialism or whatever. And as Ryan was saying, like, a lot of politicians that were totally forthcoming about their, like, sort of Trumpy views did just fine. I think that's also reflective of the fact that, like, that is, all of the election denialism stuff, all of the sort of fabricated meta world that the Democrats create in order to pretend that, they're not who they are, right? That is what people don't really, like, respond to. And some of the Trump stuff does get into that, where you start, like, relitigating the 2020 election, and that too is sort of not really people's concern. It's like, I can't pay for groceries. I, like, don't want my kids to be, approached by hand rubbing, like, baby TikTok teachers who want to castrate them. And I feel, like, icky. I feel squicky about, like, this thing where we're all supposed to just, eat the bugs and live in the pot. And there's a big, I think, like, the normies out there are pretty, you could get a big, decent coalition, and some politicians have successfully gotten a decent coalition of normies out there that basically feel that way, and they respond when politicians offer that to them. It's just that very rarely do politicians offer that to them, and it may be that like the solution to it is not political and has much more to do with the kind of like spiritual cultural grind that James is describing, all of which conduces in me not to despair really at all, so much as to like, I don't know, I kind of feel fine. Like this, I would have loved, as I said before, I would have loved to watch every Democrat lose. That would have like felt great. But it doesn't seem like we are facing down exactly like a populace that has, just been so totally captured by the biosecurity scientism state or whatever that it can no longer even like function. It seems like we're facing down a political class that is in many ways addicted to like fantasy casting and distraction and diversion and misdirection, because it doesn't really like understand what reality is. And then like a populace, many people among whom are really sort of just trying to get somebody to like pay direct attention to the realities on the ground and offer them solutions that are not completely wackadoodle.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't know. Tell me I'm wrong. It seems like that's kind of where
I think so. I think by far the most interesting thing of the night, or it will be interesting when you dig into it, is DeSantis's 20-point landslide against Christ. Christ, who I should remind everyone, though he looks kind of like a chameleon, reptilian, side switcher opportunist. If you talk to people who know Florida politics, he's a very, very successful and skilled retail politician. He's just kind of, past his prime and was heading into a pretty successful, consequential, forceful governor in DeSantis, who squeaked by a meth addict by just 30,000 votes or whatever it was. Maybe it was even less than that in 2018, but has governed well and competently. I think he probably sealed Christ's fate with his energetic, in front of the camera, competent, and fluent in all the details performance with Hurricane. What was that one called? Ian? I forget. Just a month ago or whatever it was. So I think digging into the electoral consolidation and gains that DeSantis made in Florida will be probably the most interesting thing to do from the kind of analytical side in the coming weeks. And maybe Arizona as well, a very different state in many ways, just sort of demographically and historically, but looks poised to perhaps send Kari Lake to the governor's mansion. Another amateur. They're still counting, of course, but the big day of turnout in Arizona looks to be breaking more in Kari Lake's direction, as is to be expected given voting patterns amongst Democrats.
But Ryan,
yes.
We've been warned about the red mirage.
The red mirage.
Maricopa County. So you never know what's going to turn up out there.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I wonder. Yeah, just the mirage and the blue reality or whatever. All the timing, all this, it like varies in how you count in each of these places, right? So it'll be interesting that our new normal. We should mention this. Our new normal now, post 2020 and COVID, is rampant mail-in balloting, and the old Democratic machines, and even some new Democratic machines. There's the infrastructure of the Democratic Party. They're much better at hoovering up votes leading up to election day for the month prior. This is not my own insight. I'm repeat. There's actually a very useful long thread from John Hayward on Twitter, which said that's the first thing that Republicans have to realize they have to adapt to. This is it's a built-in structural advantage with Democrats, this kind of permanent expanded mail-in voting. So on the right, we should be arguing for the abandonment of mail-in voting and really for election day, that we used to have, and for the narrowing of mail-in voting for only those who really can't get to the polls or overseas in the military. That plea will have mixed results across the states, so a very decentralized election system here in the United States, which has its pluses and minuses. So anyway, that's the sort of Arizona demo and then the Florida demo would be interesting things to dig into and will portend, I think, portend's not the right word. It will teach us some things about what we should expect in 2024. As for the the coming Trump DeSantis showdown. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this breaks for either of them in their calculation. I mean, DeSantis may decide that it's now or never, and that would not be a crazy calculation. Ask 2012 Charlie Crist if he'd do it all over again differently. I think he would. Sorry, not Charlie Crist, the big guy from Jersey.
Fetterman?
Not
That's the big guy from
that's the next door
guy
state.
from Pennsylvania. Yeah, okay,
yeah.
sorry. The big guy from Jersey.
Chris.
Thank you. Yeah. I was thinking Chris Christie, and I said Charlie Crist. Yeah, I meant Chris Christie. Yeah, and then I don't know what kind of conclusion Trump draws from all this. I would be surprised if he still announces next week that he's running in 2024. I suspect he might wait for the runoff in Georgia and the fate of his endorsed candidate, Herschel Walker. Now, if Masters ends up getting carried across the line by Lake, also possible, less likely, but possible, and then Adam Laxalt becomes the senator from Nevada, Georgia, like last time, is going to become, a giant funnel of money. It'll be interesting to see. So, it'll be an exciting couple months. Or I guess I should say an exciting month, the Georgia runoffs. December 6th.
To that point, when I said, the U.S. is the world's richest country and we can't count votes, I was cribbing from Glenn Greenwald, who cites Lester Holt and Savannah Guthrie on NBC. We don't say election night anymore. It's now election month. I mean, normalizing that and just sort of, isn't that cute? Isn't it funny? Is obviously a strategy, a rhetorical strategy that we should push back against, as well as an actual, legislative and judicial strategy that we've got to be watching out for.
Yeah, and it will lead, the prospect of eradicating it is probably dim. So that means you have to adapt to it. And it sort of remakes the closing months of a campaign, obviously. I mean, an October surprise maybe needs to turn into a September surprise now. So all the strategic calculations about money spending and all the rest, I think, need to be reworked. We haven't really, especially on the right, we haven't really caught up to this reality yet. So it's something that's worth catching up to. One House race I just want to flag because this Katie Porter Scott Baugh race in Orange County. I just bring it up because Scott's a friend of the Institute, longtime friend of the Institute, and he's within 9,000 votes now, 900 votes, sorry, and but California is like the outlier. It takes them like 10 to 17 days to count all these votes. It's really remarkable, but it would be one to watch. Scott would be a great congressman, so keep an eye on that one.
I'm just kind of wondering, regarding, I know this is kind of like a tricky question, but Trump, has this kind of wounded lion at it. I don't really see him going quietly.
Yeah.
This could really be like like a bull moose type of situation. I just don't know where this points if he and DeSantis really engage in some kind of showdown. I mean, it seems like it would really, really hurt the Republicans' chances going forward, and really kind of, I think everybody agrees it would be sort of destructive. I'm not saying that I think one way or the other, one of them should, bow down, but I feel like it's not going to. I don't really see a good spot in this. It doesn't seem like a super positive dynamic.
Yeah, I only see 3 ways Trump doesn't run, or maybe 4. One, he could die, God forbid. I wish death on nobody. That would be terrible for his family and everyone else. But it's, he's not a young man. Who knows? He could be in jail. But I suspect, if Yuval Levin is right and Democrats draw the same conclusion, the last thing they would want to do would be to keep him from running. I think they'd want to encourage it, so that might be a strategic non-indictment. And then I think the one way neither of those bad things would happen and he still wouldn't run is if his national standing slid precipitously down to just his base, or the very bottom of his base, which could happen. I mean, it's unlikely, but it could happen. And then his, the internal folks really convince him that, look, if you ran, even if you, sure, you would win the primary, of course, but you can't win a general. and he believes that. That's probably unlikely, but that would be the final scenario. So yeah, I don't know. If I were advising DeSantis and he decided that he had to run, that it was now or never, and that he'd be better for the country, and he's got all this cash, et cetera, DeSantis would be fighting that primary battle with half a hand tied behind his back, in the sense that he would really have to conduct himself in a much more civil manner and almost not deferential. Of course, one couldn't do that. But he'd have to do all that he could to alienate as few as possible of Trump's base, and to kind of beat the guy fair and square, so to speak, to weather that fight. But he'd still come out of it wounded, and who knows? I mean, I agree with you, Seth. And then if Trump were defeated in a primary, would he decide to just scuttle the whole thing and run as a third party? Who knows? That's your bull and moose scenario.
Yeah, they are both in a position to bloody each other pretty badly should circumstances and their own ambitions conspire to make that happen. DeSantis' supporters at his rally were chanting 2 more years, which is kind of funny and also tells you like what their mood is, right? So he's got his own now, very significant and increasingly national supporter base. He's got a record that is increasingly independent from like MAGA as a movement.
Yeah.
Trump, has done his, thing that he does with people he views as challenges or threats, which is to give DeSantis a nickname designation. So that's obviously on his mind.
And then he teased some, embarrassing knowledge about DeSantis' marriage.
Yeah.
So typical Trump, he just stepped 1 foot down the stairway of decency on that one.
Well, I mean, he's like,
yeah,
it's funny. He's really, he was in 2016. I haven't been following Truth Social that closely, but in 2016 he was really good at this. He kind of got people. And it was never pretty, and it was sometimes actually quite ugly, but he would nail them in this very, he has a real aesthetic gift for trollery, and like that was a big part of what people, I think, reacted to in him. And the 2 things that he's done, the 2 big things that he's done with DeSantis so far, like haven't really landed, at least for me, in that same way, which is another reason that makes me think like, okay, so this is not somebody that is just going to get jabbed, that's going to get, or that's going to get like a little Marco'd out of the competition. And Trump is certainly not somebody that seems hugely likely to me to be like, well, for the interest of the party, I'm not quite winning this fight.
In the country.
So we all need to rally around the Republican Party. Like, he's already trashing the people he endorsed that didn't like talk enough about his loss in 2020. So, and therefore lost in his opinion. I mean, didn't he say something to the effect of like, somebody asked him, what should your responsibility be for your endorsed candidates? He said, well, if they do well, I should get all the credit. And if they lose, nobody should blame me at all.
Yeah.
That's like, and like, DeSantis might have a little bit more kind of political self-control than that. But
and Zeldin, right, your reference was that Trump was saying that Zeldin, part of the reason Zeldin lost is because he backed away from 2020 election stolen narrative. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see how Ron DeSanctimonious, that doesn't seem to hit.
No, he's going to have to try another one. I mean, he will. Like, he'll know that it didn't work, but that didn't. That was indicative of the difficulty of the task, because he's not as like lame as the guys that.
I've got to go a little early, so I want to see what everyone thinks about the flip side of primary troubles, which was I listen to the Politico thing every morning just to get caught up on the what the kind of centrist establishment media thinks of all this stuff. It's a good 2 to 3 minute update, and they were saying how White House source, anonymous White House source says he's running, because so Biden's going to draw the lesson of this. I defied political gravity again. Hell yeah, I'm running for re-election. While half of his party is like, oh, please don't, please don't. And so if Biden decides that, we've sort of talked about this before, but if Biden decides that he's going to run and the Democrats have no way of forcing him to not do it, outside of primarying him, it'll be very difficult and pretty unprecedented in the modern primary system for a sitting president, incumbent president, to be primaried successfully. So we'll see. That'll be interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, just to to cross the T on the
Yeah.
the ultimate duel thing. It's unfortunate that leaders are so strongly incentivized to fight an ultimate battle to the political death for the presidency. You know, we need more than that, and we can't afford to lose pretty good people because it's just all sort of leading to this ultimate gladiatorial competition where, you know, one person stands there in sort of a pool of blood and hopefully, you know, they don't pass out before they get garlanded with laurels or whatever. It would be nice if there were a way for, you know, Trump and DeSantis and, you know, the undercard to find fruitful and useful things to do, rather than just kind of kill each other off until there's one left standing. I don't think that's a great model for 24 or frankly for any year. And I think that should remind us that the incentives are so strongly aligned in that direction, because really it's not about the presidency, it's about the executive branch, and it's about the administrative state that has grown to really dwarf the presidency itself. We saw Trump struggle to execute any kind of mastery over his own executive branch, and I don't think that's just going to be a Trump problem going forward. It certainly hasn't been in the past. I mean, just ask the ghost of John F. Kennedy about that. And so, you know, we want to preserve our talent. We want to make sure that we have, you know, our guys are not all killing each other off. But you know, one way or the other, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level, you know, grabbing the presidency just isn't enough anymore, I don't think. It all comes down to, you know, who's really governing this country and how difficult it is to dislodge any of those people from power, regardless of whether you're a voting citizen or the president of the United States himself.
Yeah, you know, that's a really good point, James. Like the casualties of primaries, especially among Republicans, especially lately, have been damaging in more ways than just like, oh, my preferred guy didn't end up being the candidate. It's like there's a whole, you know, even people that are not our favorite guys can be, you know, useful or even good leaders, or at least better than the Democrat option in their locales. And we have recently been forced to recover the like urgency of federalism as a concept and like Madisonian kind of small communities and so forth. And like we want those things to become more robust and to assert more independence from the like vast spider web of federal and administrative machinery, not less. So you need like a whole team. You need a deep bench. That's why like somebody like Carrie Lake is so important and interesting. And yeah, you don't want those people to be just periodically engaging in a ritual bloodbath where like one champion to rule them all shall emerge and all others will be like summarily executed, functionally speaking. So yeah, I mean, on the other side of this, as Ryan was asking about the Biden of it all, I mean, this is, Seth, in some ways, this is kind of the flip side of how overheated it was easy to get in the lead up to like the midterms for Republicans, right? Like we, as you said, people were like, we're going to take every state, you know, and like the red tsunami. And then as you said, like we had already in the summer been like, well, maybe Dobbs is going to just destroy our chances or whatever. Similarly, in the lead up to this midterm, you heard like a lot of people, including Democrats, being like, well, you know, Joe Biden is basically done, and we're just gonna all have to admit now that he's like non compos mentis. And George Will was like, maybe he can take Kamala with him, and we'll just get a new, you know, hit Newsom or something at the head of the Democrat Party. And Newsom himself, along with like other Democrat sort of sub deities, right? Sublunar deities were like already lining themselves up for various forms of recrimination. Is it because we were too Marxist and culturally extreme? Is it because we were not Marxist or culturally extreme enough? And like the battle for replacement was already beginning. You know, now Biden is going to be sort of shuffled off the stage. And now, similarly to the flip in the Republican world, like that's just all of that is kind of different now. It's actually quite. It would be shocking now if Biden didn't kind of like. If it was, it would be very, very difficult to unseat Biden, I guess is how you guys already put it. And that's a kind of to me that's a kind of silver lining, because
Yeah.
it's like this is like, I mean, I'm much
No,
less,
it's true. It's true.
like this guy's like way more
And he
vegetable.
seems to think like, oh my God, this is a huge victory for me.
Right.
I mean, which
I'm vindicated. Everything that I did. I mean, to talk about drawing the wrong conclusion from the public's messaging. Like, I'm vindicated.
If the Democrats really can't figure out a way to get, I mean, it's really like both parties have the same problem. So, you know, in that sense, it's good. Yeah, and it's true. I mean, I feel like they're going to have to get through Biden. They're going to have to get, like Gavin Newsom is, that is. They're going to have to get through Biden. He's going to have to get through Harris. I mean, there's plenty of contenders who are very imperfect on that side. So I guess, you know, we've got like a struggle coming, but so do they. So I guess that's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, it would. I mean, if Biden could make it, and I just say that because he's even older than Trump and has declined in various ways, as we've discussed for the last 2 years. If he can make it, I mean, he'll be in pole position historically and institutionally to win re-election, because the modern presidency just has so many built-in advantages. Then again, it's, as we said at the outset, it's a very closely divided country. Biden seems unable to tack to the center given the dynamics in his party, and I think his old proclivities. He's always been a kind of a leftist. Some who have worked closely with him have said. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Just one update from True Social and the account of Donald J. Trump. This is classic Trump because I'll read it and then I can explain why I think it's classic Trump. Now that the election in Florida is over and everything went quite well, shouldn't it be said that in 2020 I got 1.1 million more votes in Florida than Ron D got this year? 5.7 million to 4.6 million. Just asking. And it's Trump conflating, a sort of cycle advantage that he had, that is more people vote in presidential elections, and attributing it all to his own virtues. But you can see that gives you the flavor of Trump camp and their view of the recent press about Ron DeSantis' impressive re-election victory in Florida.
That's like when Biden said, "Oh, the seniors are getting a bigger Social Security check
than
they ever got before." Getting tied to inflation.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I love that. You drive up the index figure and then you take credit for the
yeah, it's exactly
adjustment.
Just
yeah.
Same
These are like the real fruits of like gerontocracy.
It's like, no, Grandpa, you're confusing causation and correlation. What?
It's the numerator and the denominator, Grandpa. Oh no. Yeah, I mean, there is like, I mean that mention of it at just an aesthetic level, and this is not a point that's original with me, or I don't think any of us, but like it does bear repeating. It's like, in addition to being supremely out of touch, like our leadership class is just very, very old, and like those things are not totally unrelated. There's just something. I mean, you have these on both sides. There's this generational dynamic, kind of mirrors like all the kind of okay boomer frustration, where Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis are both these say whatever else you will about either of them, these sort of vigorous and incredibly forceful figures in their party. They have this kind of dynamism to them, and you can feel, I think, in both of them a real frustration with just like this kind of the structures in which they're working, and the fact that so many elder statesmen are like really, really elder and just like won't seem to leave the scene. So, I mean, yeah, the youth thing was one other issue I wanted to ask you guys about. Actually, was this is not kind of a super new phenomenon, although it seems really stark this time around that kids are like way more left than adults. And another one that's kind of interesting is that unmarried women are like way more left than basically everybody else. It seems, based on these exit polls. And there was for a while a kind of conventional wisdom. Well, all of the hippies were super liberal, but then they grew up and they voted for Ronald Reagan. And there's that old kind of quote that I think is falsely attributed to Churchill, that if you're not a liberal before you're 30, then you're a monster, and if you are a liberal after you're 30, then you have no brains, or whatever, have no heart, have no brains, and so on and so forth. But there's also just the fact that actually the Reagan voters might well have been a whole different set of people altogether that were just mobilized in different ways. And also kids are getting just so much lefty messaging, so much kind of like Borg content funneled directly into their cyborg minds, as James might put it. And like, do you guys think that this is a death knell for, it's only a matter of time, or is that too determinist? I mean, for a while it was like the demographics because we're gonna get all these, America was gonna get so multiracial that was gonna destroy the right, and now it seems like it's, the young people are gonna grow up and they'll destroy the right. Do you think there's anything to that?
Well, I think like culture has definitely like hooked its way into their brains, like starting at about age 3 and promoted this. But, everybody kind of, I mean, I don't want to say like gets red pilled or, people wake up a little bit as they enter the world more. And, we're seeing like, over 40s, I think, have like, broken stronger and stronger to the right. Country's aging. I don't know. I mean, I like to think that as people enter the world more and deal with the consequences of the woke ideology and the leftist ideology, and they see through the like what media culture is promoting, that they kind of come back to reality a little bit. Ideally, I mean, it seems hard to imagine that they're all just going to like walk perpetually around in this fog of listening to whoever it is Taylor Swift told them to vote for. But you never know.
Yeah, didn't Peter Thiel recently kind of talk about China as this sort of vaguely like autistic teenager state that won't look adults in the eye and all of that? Like, there is I think that you're generally right about the dynamics, the way people, and you saw this, ours is not the only period in which this was a thing. Like, you saw the romantic movement kind of fizzle out in some of the same ways, right? Bliss wasn't in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven, says Wordsworth of the French Revolution, and then comes to realize, like, actually it was like less of a rising star and more of a like asteroid catapulting to Earth, bringing destruction in its wake. And like, that does happen as you encounter the real world. I also think, and James, maybe you do this, like, there's a concerted effort for that reason to make sure that these kids like never do encounter the real world, like keep them as anesthetized and distracted from it as possible, or at least like hold out before them the glittering promise that the real world is going to be abolished. Like, it's over now, and our real dreams like live in the metaverse.
Yeah, I mean, so has it ever been. Like, one of the things that human beings are very good at doing is looking at what they've been given and saying, no, I do not have enough control over this environment, so I'm going to build a new environment. And this environment is going to be so much better for me and for other people. And we don't need to sort of suffer anymore. And we don't need to sort of like be patient anymore. And we don't need to try to like quiet the insane gibbering voices that are always in our heads. No, we can use that stuff to, to create markets. We can use it to create art. We can use it to entertain ourselves. This has been going on, almost since the beginning. And what is shocking in a way is how everyone already seems to have forgotten that, like, this is what TV was. Like, sitting down in front of the boob tube and just cranking out on a stream of content that some person who you would never meet, never know the name of unless it flashed on the credit screen, sort of created for you. I mean, Saturday morning cartoons, like, we've been here. We know this movie. We know how it ends. And the last time this movie ended, it ended by, oh, well, no, we've now created like new machines that are going to be like so much better for you than the old metaverse. It's going to be the greatest metaverse ever. And the cycle continues. It should not be shocking. It is disorienting and it is unnerving to see the speed and the the audacity with which this new system is being constructed and the frankness with which it is being constructed. This isn't even sort of like a, Willy Wonka scenario where, hey kids, it'll be fun. They're just kind of coming right out and telling you, like, you are going to have to lower your horizons. You are going to have to content yourself with this form of existence. And, don't worry, like, the list of approved fantasies will be very long. It'll, every kink will be respected. And, well, not everyone, you take that Nazi outfit off, young lady, like, there will still be some guardrails, but, the mansion will have many houses, and it's just all being discussed quite frankly. And Americans are unwell physically, mentally, spiritually. Like, we've complained about the indicators, the data is in, the science is settled. Americans are unwell and beaten down and despairing and confused, and there is nothing that seems capable of stopping the continued rollout of this metaverse, this parallel universe, this vivarium, and nothing to stop people from just sort of being trundled along into it. To me personally, this bespeaks a massive loss of faith in the very simple proposition that God in fact loves you. Like, I was rewatching Fight Club finally with some relatives, and what really jumped out at me this time was part of the film. It's sort of, I don't know if it's like spoiler alert or whatever, but basically Tyler Durden sort of like yells at his protege and says, this is your pain. God does not exist, and if he did, he would hate you. The loss of this belief that, like, that it's not just there's a God, but that he actually loves you and created the universe to be good, and you are kind of the capstone of that creation. That was the intention. That was the plan. The life of the world comes from the love of God. That's not just sort of like, a bumper sticker love. It's not the kind of love that people talk about on TikTok or whatever. It's not like, I love this for you. It's like a very powerful thing and a very authoritative thing and something with massive implications. And to see people behaving in this way that we see them today seems to reflect just a loss, just a very painful loss of that idea, of that experience, if it had even been implanted to begin with. And so, there are various things that a better kind of governance could do. And, there are various like messages and inspirational, motivational statements that could be made. And, you can listen to Jordan Peterson and clean your room and so on and so forth. And, many, many things that people can do and say. But if Americans, more and more of them from birth, really do think that they exist in a reality that has nothing to do with God's love for them, then yeah, they're going to keep turning to this metaverse and the next and the next and the next, chasing a love that they will never find.
Amen to that. And we're going to close on that note. I think this has been helpful for me, at least, thinking through some of the issues going forward. Thank you all for listening to the Roundtable. If you want to learn more, visit our websites at AmericanMind.org, Claremont.org, ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, and our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life at dc.claremont.org. You can donate to support the show at claremont.org/donate. Don't forget to rate, review, share, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, everyone. Talk to you next week.